Hi everybody, I'm Stephen W. Long. This is The Writing Life, and if you've watched it all, you know this is a bit of a different venue. We kind of like it. It may become more frequent. You know, a few minutes ago I met our wonderful guest. She's the keynote speaker at this year's Terroir Creative Writing Festival. And Ellen Waterston, I so appreciate you taking the time to do this. I know you're in demand and we won't keep you too long. But this is a little bit of housekeeping, but I want you to know about this woman. I'm going to scoot through some of her accolades. You're the current Poet Laureate of Oregon, which is awesome, and through 2026, so it's a 2-year gig. You're the recipient of the Stuart H. Holbrook Award and the Soapstone Bread and Roses Award. This is something that we're going to get into. You're the founder and president of the Writing Ranch, so I want to talk to you about that. You also do a weekly column, The Third Act. You've been a TED Talk presenter, and in one of those that I read, and it might have been on the TED Talk, you talked about us being one small daisy in a long, infinite daisy chain. So thank you. I think I feel grounded now. And just looking ahead, on May 10th, so this is the 3rd, you're going to be at the OSU Cascades for Community Connect. I got that right? And then in 2026, February of 2026, Riding Down the Baja 2026 in Todos Santos, Mexico. And, you know, let's start there. You mentioned that as we walked up. I don't know what that is.
Well, thank you, first of all, Stephen, for having me on this program today. The Writing Ranch likes to hold workshops in places, landscapes that kind of ambush the participants' idea of what they think they are as writers or what they think they came to write. So I put them in deserts, no surprise. I'm a desert rat. One takes place every fall in the high desert of Oregon, and then each February, this will be the 15th year coming up.
Oh, wow.
I hold a full week-long, 7 full days of workshop with guest faculty, and what we mentioned earlier is that the guest faculty 2 years ago included Judith Barrington and Ruth Gundel. This past year, Kim Stafford and Perrin Kearns came.
Sure.
So it's a full week of writing and in a landscape, as I say, that is startling and kind of ambushes what people think they're there to do.
I would think that it sort of forces concentration. You're not going anywhere.
You're not going anywhere, although we do go places. We do some explorations, but the landscape can't help but inform the writing.
Sure. Well, and that's almost the thrust of this interview, which I'll get there. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. You've done a variety of writing, poetry certainly, but then nonfiction as well, and of course the column that you do. But I was thinking about the poetry particularly, and that I think that people who maybe don't follow poetry sort of think about roses are red. If you said poetry, that's, you know, they would think about doggerel, rhyming. How would you describe poetry?
For me, poetry is the artful compression of place, person, emotion.
Yeah.
It is distilled. There's no flab.
Yeah.
Ted Kooser, and I gather we share our fondness for that wonderful poet.
You bet.
He said in a 7-line poem he'll make 800 different word choices before he's satisfied. And I think that process is an illustration of getting just the word, just that word. Mm-hmm. We have such a huge box of word paints to choose from when we speak, when we write, and we generally operate on kind of one cylinder. You know, we have this group of language, groups of words that
your go-to.
So freshening it up, but I think poetry, and then, you know, it just delivers that
That's why it's so impactful.
arrow. Yes.
Yeah. I didn't know that about Ted, but thinking back, I'm not surprised. And your work as well, but I would say that his seems almost inevitable. It doesn't come across as, oh, it's complicated. It's so approachable, and yet there's a lot of thought that goes into that.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay, so I want to ask you, I think I think poetry probably is in your DNA. Do you remember your first poem?
I remember the first time that as a young person,
Sure.
I'd fiddle around. But it was at college, and I wrote a poem about a soap bubble
Oh, great.
that had this sort of, I talk about it as this sort of sense that life was precious and short. And so in the poem I wrote this line, eager to eke, and I thought I was being so clever, but I misspelled it, and I wrote E-E-K instead of E-K-E. Eager to eke all its life out, or whatever it was.
Yeah.
It burst. So
Yeah.
the soap bubble bursts at the end of the poem. And my instructor said, that was a very clever change.
Absolutely.
And I had no idea I'd done it. So anyhow, the poem didn't, survive much better than the bubble, but it was a fun beginning.
Well, and so my follow-up to that is, in that poem, or maybe poems in general, when you write something that you're pleased with, how does it make you feel? Is it, well, you tell me.
I think it's like a pinball machine. I mean,
Okay.
every so often it just settles. You try and you try and you work and you work.
Yeah.
What's been so interesting in doing this Poet Laureate work, I have made the commitment to write a new poem for special events.
Mm-hmm.
And it's often kind of, oh my gosh, it's coming right up. So there's the pressure.
Some pressure, yeah.
But the pressure to get to a place where it's kind of sort of like that ball
Mm-hmm.
rolling in that pocket.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the feeling anyway. How you get there is art, not science.
Sure. And again, I go back to your aptitude for this. I suspect you've got a pretty big toolbox, vocabulary-wise. And so, I don't know, does it start with an emotion, and then you try to color that, find the words to color, or I don't know, how do you do it?
There are sort of two different things that happen. One is if I feel I have something to write to, such as today, this wonderful terroir writing festival.
Mm-hmm.
I have a kind of a sense, right? So I have a sense of what the basket that I need to put some words in looks
Mm-hmm.
like, as opposed to the poem Crop Short about my father's death.
Oh.
And the one that talks about recalling him is though when my hair was cut short, and still for the longest time I passed the brush past where the cropped strands now
Oh,
so
boy.
abruptly ended.
Oh,
Now that just shows up. It's like a gift from who knows where. It seems like a sacred trust in some respects to put that down. I don't know.
But you're the conduit.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that that's true anyway. I have that feeling anyway.
Yeah.
It's you sort of open yourself to that language, to that emotion, to that expression, to that event, right? How can one share the extraordinary, complicated, exquisite nature of being humans on the earth through a poem?
Yeah. This isn't in my notes. You just triggered something. Do you think that all of us have some ability, or maybe like a musician, anybody can learn to plink on the guitar, or a guitar, piano, a little bit. But I think to go beyond that, you have to have been born with something. Where do you think people fall in that? Can anybody do it, or no? Or
it sounds a little woo-woo, but I do think we have the capacity for peripheral vision that we don't exercise. So I think I'm watching this with my grandsons actually, as they're honing that peripheral vision to future and jobs and the sort of artistry of being young and receptive and I'll just roll down that hill. Is getting a bit compressed. So I think it's a commitment really to the artist's way.
Okay.
I think we all
acceptance, letting
it's
it
an
in.
acceptance, and it's a commitment to a life of shall we say, lower middle class income.
Okay.
You know what I mean? I mean, in other words, I see what my grandsons are up to.
Yeah.
The idea of making a living as a writer, unless of course you're in the top 1%.
There's
it's
a couple.
It's a love.
Yeah.
It's a passion.
Yeah. It's interesting, we're talking about Ted Kooser, that I guess this is fair to say, that's not his day job. He's been other things. He's been a professor, I think an insurance salesman.
Years.
Yeah, and but the notoriety is Poet Laureate. That maybe doesn't pay all well. We were sort of talking about this before we started.
It depends on how you define pay.
Sure. Well, satisfaction
Exactly.
would be different.
Exactly.
Yeah. You said don't ask you any tough questions. Too bad. Here's one.
Uh-oh.
Do you have a favorite poem of yours?
Of mine.
And I suspect you don't, because as I was coming up with this, I thought, well, they're like your children. You really shouldn't have a favorite, but nevertheless.
What I'll say in answer to that is you're right. I love them all, sort of. Some of them are still cantankerous. It's rather like. So my mother was a painter.
Okay.
And our sense of her watercolors, well, really maybe even her oil paintings, is that, and she would admit they were never really finished.
Right.
They were never really finished. So I think I feel that about many poems, and I revisit them, but there's some that are very satisfying to me, both because they're heart openers or because they simply celebrate a yellow-headed blackbird. I don't know. I can't answer that. It is a tough question.
Yeah, it's interesting that you use that, because you're painting, but you're painting with words.
Exactly.
Yeah. Let me just say, in doing some research on Oregon Arts Watch, they said about you, through profound observation of the ecological world, Waterston seeks to understand it by becoming part of it. Can you talk about becoming part of it?
So, I grew up in New England. I grew up on the East Coast, a very different culture and a very different landscape, and moved west with my husband to ranch, which we did. And so I was exposed, both in Montana and then in Oregon, to this big, big, big country. And it was at first very unsettling and startling, and then I started to see how embracing it is, and how interesting it is, and how subtle. I think in a landscape such as what's behind us, it feels sort of accessible. It feels sort of green and flourishing and familiar somehow. But the desert takes knowing. It's a slow cooker. So it just became a point of mine to celebrate it. It has meant so much to me. There's a part of me that thinks we're led to the landscape that teaches us what we need to know.
Okay.
Speaking of woo-woo. And I think this desert is that for me.
Yeah.
It just doesn't stop informing me.
You make me think. I came from the Midwest as a child, and that landscape, which is very green, it's very humid and so on, to Southern California, which I hated. And I hated it partly because of my age and moving from my friends, but I hated its desert. But there came a time when it rained and the wildflowers popped up.
They've just been sitting there waiting.
Yeah.
It's remarkable.
Yeah.
It's remarkable. There's a mouse in the desert that that creates its own drinking water inside itself.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, we need to learn about that. How do you do that?
Yeah, that'd solve a lot of problems.
Really?
A friend of mine is a gardener, and I was actually just with him and helping, and we talked about patience, and he said, well, you have to slow yourself down to the speed of the garden. And which made me think of you and writing about the natural world. And I wondered, would you give advice to a wannabe poet about the natural, how to observe, how to not just look, but to really see?
Well, I mean, just to use another gardening term of pause, ponder, prune. So that's sort of the process of writing, I guess. But I think a good entry is there's a prompt that I love, which is landscape is person, person is landscape. So that what aspect of self is that azalea for you? Or that volcano, as I address in this poem, there's always more.
Right, which you did.
Right.
Yeah.
I think, I feel, I guess, gosh, I'm stumbling because I really do believe everything is metaphor. And if one can seize on it and not worry about whether it's the metaphor for that thing, but it's how it speaks to you. How does it speak to you? But how many people actually do what I do, which is when you throw away cut flowers, I give them a little kiss.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe just start there, and
Yeah.
everybody will decide you've really gone over the edge.
It's connection, really make that connection.
Make a connection. I mean, everything is speaking to us.
Yeah.
Everything is speaking to us, or pleading with us, or celebrating us.
Yeah.
Everything is.
Yeah.
Everything.
I think that's a great segue. I was going to ask you about your poem, The Making of a River Keeper. And I wondered where that came from. And to zero in a little bit, is there some personal experience in there? I mean, is it just observational, or is it closer to you than that?
This is the poem about floating down the Deschutes River.
Yes.
Yes. So yes, in this poem, I'm observing the river. Until very recently, my house was on the Deschutes River.
Okay.
As it goes through Bend. And what we're watching is the manipulation of these waterways. They're more like canals, really, they're certainly not free-flowing rivers.
Okay.
And they become, as a town like Bend grow, it becomes a playground.
Right.
And so it had been over a decade of observing this river from my back porch, and watching the sort of the rudeness, the lack of engagement with what's around. So I use the parents of this child as that lack of engagement,
And that really comes through.
and that the child, which is sort of the child in us all, but in the poem it's the child,
Right.
their child, who is actually seeing the river,
Right.
seeing its inhabitants, and becoming a conservationist in that moment.
Yeah. The parents in this remind me of, I was told that something that belongs to everyone is the responsibility of no one. And unfortunately, people act like that sometimes. The other poem that I wanted to talk about, and Life is Uncertain. Do you recall that? And particularly, so at the end of that, it says, all he wants when surveying another season is to know she'll be waiting for him at home in the evening, and he can ask her, do you remember when we couldn't have said any of this? You got to me. She'll take his calloused hand in hers and nod and say she does.
So that's a poem that is a rancher farmer reviewing, really, it's structured over the course of a year, basically, or seasons. And each season, something has happened environmentally that's shocking. But he has a home to go to, and a loving partner, a wife who will just she will say she does remember. She just does remember.
Sure.
And it's the grounding thing. So they're witnessing bravely together change that they struggle to understand, but they're coping with.
Are they because they have each other?
Because they have each other, and because they have no choice. But
there's no plan B.
That the rub is, I hope that it causes a response in the reader, because we are at a moment of needing to make some choices, i.e. take certain positions about things.
Sure.
It didn't just start, in November. And so, you can cut that part out if you want. Anyhow, I don't think that poem has yet appeared in a publication. I think it'll be in a new collection.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to that. Briefly, again, the theme of aging. Your column, the third act. I believe I'm right in that it's the same theme as We Could Die Doing This. Dispatches on Aging from Oregon's Outback. Is that? What do you think?
What about?
Just that's a theme and a kind of a motivation maybe for some of this work.
Well, I mean, this title came from my children taunting me with the phrase that I once uttered when we were off on a wild adventure. I was with them, and I thought, oh my gosh, we could die doing this. And they've never let me forget that, because it just seemed sort of funny at the time. It's only at this, not yesterday, but over the last, I don't know, decade plus, I realize we all have this in common.
Yeah.
And I think that the older generations are and aren't supported in this society all that well, and I think we are a mighty force. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of us. B. I mean, so yes, there are challenges associated with it, but as I said earlier today, what stage of life doesn't have challenges?
Sure.
And we're instructed to see them as difficult, and instructed culturally to see ourselves as diminished, as not players, get out of the way. There's an awful lot of that. There's ghettoization of people over a certain age when you see how some of the retirement and assisted living communities work. Not to say there isn't a role for those kinds of things. However, I just urge, if we have the energy to speak, if not walk, but speak, we need to speak up. And I don't mean in some great rabble-rousing political sense. I just mean reflections on history, on past, so we don't repeat history. How to love, late life lessons, such as Raymond Carver wanted to just be beloved on this earth, even so. And so I think that's sort of this book. This is sort of a funny collection, and not.
Funny about a serious subject.
But it's not serious because it's part of the life. It's part of life, weirdly. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the thing we have to wrap our head around, is that death is part of life.
It's inevitable. And I have to say,
Unless you're going to freeze your...
I don't like the cold. No, I saw a fella came in with a T-shirt that said, my plan is to live forever. So far, so good.
Exactly.
Yeah. We're about out of time, but I really want to ask you about your walk on the Camino. I mean, there's all sort of aspects. There's a physical aspect to that, but I suspect that you maybe changed a little, got something from that. Can you just mention about that?
The Camino, walking the Camino de Santiago in Spain, was at a time when the Nature of Words literary festival that I ran for over a decade was morphing into this Desert Writing Prize, but it was a big transition. It was very sad for me to see the larger one compress. And I was needing, some direction. I thought walking, really walking for a living, which is what you do when you're on the Camino. You get up, you walk, you go to bed. You get up, you walk, you go to bed, would be the answer. And the other thing is that over centuries, obviously, penitents, Christians, whatever, have walked those same trails, and so there's something ground into that, stamped into that earth. And again, that peripheral thing, the verse novel that emerged from that was because I had the sense of this energy presence, and not some sort of, godlike necessarily. Actually, to the contrary, a sort of sidelined female matriarch, spiritual sort of matriarch energy. And that is something I felt, but I never intended to write about that experience. It was just going to be a break.
Right.
But when I got back to Oregon and was sorting through maps and receipts and whatnot, I found this little brochure that showed all the Camino routes. There are many, many, many that lead to Santiago de Compostela. And it looked like the stick figure of a woman leaping across Spain. And then I thought, well, there she is.
Yeah.
There she is. So that's the kind of thing I mean about peripheral vision.
Sure.
I just thought, well, there she is.
And I think that's a visual art, but I think that's what an artist's sensibility is to be attuned to that.
Yeah. No. And so then she was in charge. She really was.
Yeah.
It was all sort of in deference to her.
Yeah.
That I put whatever I put on the page.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
It's just not enough time. Ellen Waterston, thank you so much. This is a delight.
Thank you.
Oh, I appreciate it so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. We'll do it again. This is Stephen W. Long for The Writing Life.